Welcome to Author in Your Classroom from Plazoom. My name is Helen Mully, and the author joining you in your classroom, wherever that might be at the moment, for this episode is the enormously talented Jamie Littler. Welcome to the podcast, Jamie.
Hello, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Now, listeners, you may not be familiar with Jamie's name in the world of books yet. But I would be very, very surprised if many of you listening to this haven't seen and enjoyed his illustrations. In fact, if any of you are fans of the Phoenix comic, you might remember a really good series, Cog and Sprocket, which ran for 2 years. That was Jamie. And then in terms of writers you've worked with, we've got Danny Wallace, Philip Arder, Ella Denton, Barry Hutchinson, loads more.
Yeah.
And then, as if being fabulously gifted at drawing weren't enough, it turns out that Jamie can write too. So in October 2019, his first solo book was published. It's called Frostheart, and it is an absolutely captivating fantasy adventure set in a world of snow and ice, magic and monsters. It is a joy to read. It kept me completely gripped. It really did. And looking forward to a sequel, which I understand is due out later this year. So this seemed like a very good time for us to talk. So, Jamie, we are going to talk in more detail about Frostheart. We'll get onto that in a bit. But before we do that, I'd really love to hear more about your career more generally. We mentioned the Phoenix comic earlier on, and obviously illustration is your thing. Is that something you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I've always loved drawing. Ever since I was able to hold a pencil, I've drawn. I used to watch movies and read comics and try and create my own versions of them. I think I was quite lucky in the sense that I've always been surrounded by art. My dad has worked in animation all of his adult life, and my mum is a graphic designer.
Right.
So I've always been surrounded by art and art books, and we would always go and see the latest animated movie. So it's always been a massive interest of mine, and it's something that I didn't tend to think about per se. It was just something I did. It was something I needed to do. I just needed to sit down and create and make things without thinking too much about it. It was just the way I was. It wasn't until I'd say towards the end of secondary school that I really started to think of it as a possible career. I think before then I was always quite interested in going into film, like directing films and stuff like that. But when it came to choosing a job, I realized what I used to do was I used to draw the films I wanted to make. So I would draw pages and pages and pages of like storyboards, which are like comics, showing how the film would go and what the characters are doing and things like that. And I was lucky. My dad had a camera, and he said, "Why don't you go out and try and film one of these films?" When I was young, and I wasn't actually that appealed by the idea. Like I went out and tried to do it, but I slowly realized what it was that I loved was drawing the stories. And it was then that I started to think, actually, maybe that's what I want to be doing is someone who can tell stories and draw them as well.
That's really interesting. So do you think that bringing illustration into storytelling is a good thing for children to do generally?
Yeah, absolutely. And my primary school, in fact, was actually quite good. I remember we used to do a lot of projects, no matter what the lesson. So be it history or geography or science or art, we would often be encouraged to include art and pictures in that. So actually, my primary school experience was really good, and I always have those fond memories of. I think it's quite a primary school thing where you have like the best drawer in class, and you almost gain this kind of celebrity status. And I always remember it was between me and this other guy called Ben, and we would always have these drawer offs, and people would gather around and watch, which was really nice because obviously you have like the people who are really good at sports or really good at singing or dancing and all these different things. So that was always my go-to thing. But
well, what we all want to know now, Jamie, is where is Ben now?
Where is Ben now? Who knows?
Well,
I've actually sadly lost contact with him a bit. So he's probably got a sterling art career, bringing in the big bucks. I hope so at least. But yeah, I always recommend. I think if you enjoy art, if it's something you enjoy doing, that's the important thing. So doing something you enjoy, creating things that bring happiness to you. As I was saying earlier, that I loved drawing fantasy and art, and that was something that just gripped me. It was just something I loved doing. It wasn't something I felt like I had to do. And I think anytime kids can kind of bring that into whatever they're doing, I think is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you about working with authors on illustrating their stories rather than your own, and what the process is for that. So, for example, do you ever have disagreements with the authors? Do you ever see their story differently from how they want you to see it, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it does vary depending on the book I'm working on. I'm always very careful when I'm brought in as the illustrator, because I'm very aware that having just written a book myself, where as an author, you create this world and these characters, and it means so much to you. You almost feel like these characters, that you've lived in this world, and it becomes like your baby. It's your thing. So I'm very. I try to be very respectful of that. I know that the author, has this clear vision that they're trying to put across. But saying that, I think, at least in my experience, most of the authors I work with are more than happy for the illustrators to put their spin on the world.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting when you get different illustrators working with the same text. And Harry Potter is an obvious case in point. That's had so many iterations, and it's interesting how a different illustrator just takes the story in a slightly different direction, takes the characters in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, and as an illustrator and someone who loves illustration, I find that really exciting. I like the idea that a book isn't a set thing, because obviously when an author writes their story, they've got a really clear vision in their head of what that story is. But I think a wonderful thing about books is that it goes out into the world, and the people who read those books, they see their own version of that world and those characters. And I think that's just as valid as the author's point of view. I think there's something very personal and lovely about a reader connecting to a story in that way. I think that's what's so good about books, that it can open imaginations like that. So I think illustrators who have different versions of it, I don't think any version is the correct version. I like to think all of these are the correct version. I think that's a really nice thing.
Absolutely. So when did you realize that, as well as working with other people's words, you had your own story to tell?
Well, again, going back to when I was super young, storytelling was kind of inseparable to the artwork. So when I was really young, I used to draw loads of comics and storyboards, as I was saying earlier. So that was both the story I was telling and the pictures. And when I grew older and realized it was a job I wanted to do, I always wanted to be an author illustrator. That was what I went to university, I studied illustration, but I kind of specialized in children's books and storytelling. So that was always my goal, was to do both. But it's quite difficult, it turns out, so I used to write.
Who'd have thought?
Yeah, who'd have thought, right? So I used to when I started trying to get into storytelling as a job, I wrote lots of stories, and I went to publishers and said, look at my story, and here's the pictures that accompany them. And the feedback I always got was that they liked the story, that it had potential, but it wasn't quite working. And at the time, it was a bit of a shock, because the two had always gone hand in hand with me. So to be told that they really liked the pictures but weren't quite as keen on the words was it was quite shocking at the time, but I kind of pulled myself together and realized they were right, that it needed, my writing did need work. Drawing kind of came second nature to me, and writing was something that I was going to have to practice at to be good. So I managed to get a job doing illustration, but in the background, I was always practicing my writing, trying to make it better. And I got lots of rejections. I sent story after story to publishers, and they were turning them down. And I think for good reason. I look back on those stories now, and they are not very good. So they will never see the light of day. But every time I was getting better, I was listening to their advice. There was a few stories that I just couldn't finish. Like, I'm a bit of a butterfly when it comes to ideas. So I'll start an idea, think it's the most brilliant thing ever, start writing it and think, actually, this is the worst thing ever. And I'll jump to another idea, which then seems like the best thing ever. And I'll just keep doing that and not finish anything. And I got into a bit of a slump, where I was just like, maybe I'm not cut out to be a writer. Maybe it's not something I'm actually able to do. And I was walking I rent a studio in London where I go to work to do my illustration. And I was walking there one day, and it sounds kind of cliche, but I had all these different ideas in my head at the time, things I knew I wanted to do. And suddenly on this walk to work, all these ideas just suddenly flooded into one thing, one idea. I thought, characters I'd thought of from another story, situations, concepts. I knew I wanted to do a big fantasy adventure. It's something I've always loved ever since I used to read lots of comic books, as I said, and then I read the Redwall series by Brian Jacques and the Hobbit by Tolkien. And ever since then, I've had this love of like big epic fantasy adventures. And yeah, I was walking to work, and all these ideas came, and I got so excited because faster than I could write notes down on my phone at the time, I opened the notes function. I was trying to write down all these notes. Faster than I could write, all the ideas were coming together, the situations, the storyline, and yeah, I just ran to work, which I don't usually do. So that's how it was special, and it ended up being Frostheart was the story I was thinking. And I think it was a very special moment because I don't think I'd ever been that excited about a story. So I was so excited to write it that it was never a worry that I was going to jump to another idea. And I sent it to the publishers as a half-finished manuscript because I started to doubt myself again. I was like, is this any good? Are they going to like this? And I got such good feedback to continue that I did, and that ended up being Frostheart. So it's that old adage of practice makes perfect. It's a saying for a reason, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing for the listeners to take away from this idea that, yes, the first thing you write is not going to be perfect, and people may say, take it away, you need to work harder at this.
Yes, absolutely.
But as you say, the more you write, the better you get, the more you learn, and the more you listen, the more you learn. And you say you were a natural artist, and I guess you were, but you worked at your writing, and people would now call you, I guess, a natural writer.
Absolutely. And I think the two, and I don't think you ever stop learning. I think it's important not to, so my drawing, I see other artists who are just so brilliant, and I'm like, I wish I was as good as them. So my drawing needs constant improvement, and as does the writing. And I think that goes for everyone on earth, like no one's ever reached their peak. And I think it's a brilliant thing to just keep bringing in new influences and listening to people and what they have to say. And that can be quite hard sometimes, like when a teacher tells you that something isn't working. It's the same as when, an editor at a publisher will tell me that my story isn't working. And when you've put your heart and soul into something,
yes,
that can be quite a shock and quite hurtful, but it usually leads to a good place if you actually take away the advice and the positives they're putting into it, and you usually can make something better from that.
That's so true. And normally at this point, I would pass you a copy of your book and ask you to read a little for us. But thanks to the wonders of technology, we are each in our own house today.
Yes.
However, with a bit of advanced planning, you should have a copy of the book in front of you, Jamie.
I do indeed.
I've got mine here. And so in just a moment, it would be great if you could read a scene from Frostheart for us. Let's just pause a minute while we both get on the right page, and then we'll come back and we'll hear a little bit of the story. So, Jamie Littler, you're going to read an extract from your book, Frostheart, for the Author in Your Classroom podcast. Now, this is a moment from really early on in the story, isn't it?
Yes, it's in the first chapter. So in the world of Frostheart, there's all these deadly monsters that lurk underneath the snows, and people are very frightened to go on there because only the brave or foolish will set foot on the snows, because these monsters will burst out and gobble you up. So people are forced to live in these stronghold villages where they hide, protected from the dangers outside. And our main character Ash has accidentally kicked a ball onto the snow, and he and his friends have.
I love that so much.
It's a classic.
Everybody can relate to that.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have to live in a world of snow and ice.
Kicking it into your neighbour's back garden, but if your neighbour was a giant monster, that would gobble you up. So they're basically trying to get the ball, and they have to risk the snows to do so. And as they reach for the ball, this is what happens. Snow erupted into the air like water from a geyser. The children staggered back as freezing slush rained down on them. Out of the snow chasm rose 3 large shapes. Lurkers, Ash gasped, his voice strained with fear. The creatures were wet, sleek and serpentine, longer than 2 men, with 6 frost-white eyes that blinked slightly out of order, and gaping jaws filled with ice-sharp fangs and drool-slick tongues. Despite their graceless, scrambling gait, they moved with terrible speed, so quick, in fact, it was hard to make sense of their spiny crests, scrabbling claws and whip-long tails. They just looked like a writhing mass of horror to Ash. "They've cut him off," Shine screamed, and she was right. The lurkers had blocked Rise's path back to the village and were already racing hungrily towards him. Rise was frozen to the spot in fear. "We need to tell the grown-ups," Ash yelled, but he needn't have bothered. A lookout on the watchtower above had already seen the commotion. "Lurkers!" he bellowed. "Hunters! To the battlements!" Meanwhile, the lurkers were nearly upon Rise, who simply stood there, whimpering in terror. "Rise! Run!" Ash yelled at the top of his voice. This seemed to snap Rise out of his trance. He dropped the ball and began to sprint, trying his hardest to skirt round the approaching lurkers. Suddenly a hungry, violent noise grew, echoing across the plain, terrifying in its fury. It was the song of the lurkers. Harsh, ragged howls and screeches pierced Ash's ears, and his belly gave a sickening lurch as he felt the hateful emotions of the Leviathans. This was a war song. Human, catch, kill.
Oh, that is so good. When I read it the first time, I literally held my breath, and I was doing it again just now. Where did those lurkers come from?
So it's a weird story, actually. I've always loved monsters. I love drawing them. I love reading about them. Yeah, of course, right? They're wonderful things, or terrifying things, as the case may be. But what it was that for some reason, I was thinking of the game, The Floor is Lava, where you can't touch the floor. So you have to clamber over furniture or climbing frames or trees or whatever's around you to stay off the floor. And I thought that would be a really cool concept for a book idea. I thought, what if there was a world where no one could touch the floor because dangerous monsters lurked beneath. And that was where all the ideas started coming from, really. I thought, well, how would people live in that world? How would they survive? How would they get around? And that's where the ideas of these huge engine-powered sleighs came from, that they shoot across the snows just fast enough to outrun the Leviathans, who are these these huge monsters that hide underneath the snow and try and hunt people. So it weirdly came from a love of monsters and games.
Brilliant. And that is such a good way to start writing a story, isn't it? Just to take one idea, what if the floor was made of lava?
Absolutely.
How would people manage? What would they do? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's how, at least in my experience and other authors I've spoken to, the idea comes from the smallest thing. Like you may end up with these stories which are really long and hundreds of pages full of characters and stuff, but most ideas come from one idea. Most stories come from one small idea, and it could just be as simple as that.
Sure.
And it grows from there as you start to ask questions about it.
Absolutely. Now, this may sound a bit odd, but go with me. I think of Frostheart as a very noisy book.
Yeah.
Obviously, at the heart of it, you've got. Trust me, go with me. Honestly. So Ash, the hero, his singing is obviously really important, and then you've got music threaded all the way through. But if you look back at the piece that you just read, it's full of sounds. You've got scrabbling, screaming, ragged howls, screeches. Is sound something you're really conscious of as a writer?
Yeah, I guess
or did I
so.
just reveal something you didn't know?
I knew that I wanted it to be quite a frantic story, with like very fast paced, because it's an adventure set on a moving vessel, a vessel that's shooting across the snow. I wanted to keep this sense of movement throughout the story, but I think what it might be, in honesty, is that I love films, I love animation, and I kind of see my stories moving like a movie in my head, and I have these when I'm writing or drawing, for that matter. I actually always have I have these playlists of songs I listen to, like often like soundtracks for movies and video games, that really get me in the zone for those scenes. And I think that comes in, and I can hear the characters' voices and the sound effects that would be going on. And I just try and put that in the book, so it hopefully feels like the reader is there, like seeing this happen in front of them and experiencing it.
I think it is. I think I'm getting a soundtrack when I read, because it's so visual.
I wanted to do a thing where I say, like, share my playlist and say, start playing the playlist at this moment and read the book at this speed, so the soundtrack can kind of
that would be so good.
Yeah, that would be so cool.
Are you sure you don't want to do films? You just can't be bothered to do the last
I think that
bit.
part of me's never quite gone.
And your characters are really vivid too. I mean, Ash is just adorable, but I fell in love with Luna and Captain Nook and especially the grumpy guardian, Tobu.
Yeah, Tobu.
And how did you make... Oh, he's just lovely. But how did you make each of them so distinct and so real? Did they start with illustrations?
When I'm drawing books for other authors, it always starts with the illustrations. But because this is the first time I wrote the story as well, it was kind of at the same time. So as I was figuring things out, I have a notebook, and my notebook is full of notes, funnily enough. And next to these notes, loads of sketches, some of them so rough and squiggly, only I could probably understand what I've drawn. But it's just trying to get the ideas down. And as soon as I start thinking of characters that might be there, I start writing things about them, what they might be like, and I start drawing little sketches of what I think they could look like. So it kind of happens at the same time. Sometimes I'll make characters that don't even appear in the book. Sometimes like 2 or 3 characters will become one character. You things change as the story goes, but it's all happening in that notebook and with sketches.
When you do start writing, when you're actually pulling the words together, how carefully do you need to think about the language you use? So, for example, in the extract that you read, a couple of times you use, and again, I don't know if this was deliberate or it's just a natural writing form, but you use the rule of 3 twice to describe the monsters. So they're wet, sleek, and serpentine. And they have spiny crests, scrabbling claws, and whip-long tails. And that rhythm sort of flows throughout the writing. Is that something you're aware of?
Yeah, partially. I can't remember where I heard that, but I definitely remember that if you really want to emphasize something, that doing it in threes really helps. I think it might have been at school. We were once doing a speech
You did learn something
class.
at school that was useful.
Yeah. And I seem to remember that it was something that if you really want to get a point across, repeat it in three ways. And I think that for some reason that's just stuck with me. But I think you're right. I think something I really love, especially about children's books, is they can almost be like songs. They've got this rhythm to them,
Yes.
which I think, like, at least my favorite children's books, they're fun to read because they have a rhythm and they make you want to turn the page. And I find that they tend to be a little bit more expressive about what's going on. So they'll tell you more about the sound effects or how the character feels, like if they're feeling excited or a bit sick, or if it's cold, or it feels like you're there. It really puts you in the shoes of the character. And it was something I really wanted to put into my book, that I wanted it to be fun to read. I didn't want it to be boring. I wanted it to be exciting and feel like there's a pace pushing you along, that you want to keep turning the page.
What you're saying there feeds into, again, what the young people listening will be told all the time at school, which is show, don't tell, show, don't tell. So bring in different senses to put the reader into the picture.
Yeah, that's a really important thing. I remember learning that. You learn that a lot in school, I think, and it's, I would say, maybe the most valuable lesson is show, don't tell. There's nothing more boring than just having everything written. This happened and this happened and this happened, because it almost sounds like a shopping list or something.
Yes.
I think, like, trying to be really expressive and make it sound explosive if it's an action scene, or try and really show how a character's feeling without having to tell the readers. I think that's readers, especially children, are intelligent people, and I think you don't need to tell them everything. I think readers will understand that what you're trying to say, if you're accurately showing how a character feels, then there's more exciting ways to tell those things.
Well, you are certainly a master at telling an exciting story and keeping the reader excited. I know that when I got to the end of Frostheart, I instantly wanted to grab the next instalment of Ash's Adventures so I could find out what was coming afterwards. So let's pause again just for a moment, and then perhaps we can have a little sneak preview into where Ash's journey might be taking him next. Welcome back to Author in Your Classroom with Jamie Littler. So, Jamie, as we discussed earlier, there is a second instalment of your Frostheart series on the horizon. Are you able to give us any clues, without any spoilers, for the people who haven't read the first issue yet, as to what happens next?
Yeah, I'll do my best. It's I'm really excited about it. It really picks up the pace. So if we thought the first book was fast paced, I think the second book even more so.
Wow.
Ash is continuing his search for his missing parents. He's following a lullaby that is leading him through the world, and it's led him to Aurora, which is basically the center of the world of Frostheart. It's this huge stronghold city built inside an ancient volcano, and it's where loads of the different clans and strongholds meet. So it's full of weird and wonderful characters and people. So Ash is really out of his depth here, and he slowly begins to realize that there's a bigger story at play in the Snow Sea, in the world of Frostheart, that something big is stirring on the horizon, a big storm, shall we say. And Ash and the Frostheart crew are in danger of getting wrapped up in it. Obviously, Ash is just trying to continue to become a better song weaver and continue to search for his parents, but it looks like it's going to be impossible to avoid being brought into this big conflict that's about to erupt across the world.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay. That is just going to be amazing. So We're almost out of time.
Oh, man.
I know. Where did it go? But I did just want to ask you one more thing, which is listening to this will be lots of young people, and many of them might have in their mind that maybe one day they want to be an illustrator or an author, or quite possibly both. If you had any advice for them, what would it be?
I think is to make sure you have fun. I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think if you're doing something because you feel like you should or you have to, there's nothing that's going to put you off faster. I think that came when I was writing Frostheart, is that I was having so much fun doing it, and hopefully it shows in the story and in the drawings that I liked doing it. I would look forward to waking up in the morning and doing it. And I think if you can just keep going, keep working at it, but make sure you're having fun doing it, then your love, your passion will come through in your work, in your drawings, in your writing, or whatever you're doing. I think as long as you're passionate and trying hard, it will come through in what you do.
That's fantastic advice, Jamie. So I really hope that this podcast will inspire listeners to read Frostheart if they haven't already, and also that the free resources pack that's available from Plazoom to go with this episode might inspire some incredible fantasy writing too. Thank you so much for being my guest on Author in Your Classroom, Jamie. It's been so much fun, and well, here's to a time when we might be able to talk to again, but maybe face to face next time.
Absolutely, it's been great. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for listening, everyone. It's been really fun.
It really has. Thanks, Jamie. Take care.
Take care.
Author in Your Classroom is brought to you by Plazoom, where we are passionate about making great literacy lessons easy with inspiring, ready-to-go resources created by teachers to cover the whole of the primary curriculum. So, whether you're a teacher desperate for SATs revision that pupils will actually enjoy, a parent just as baffled by fronted adverbials as your child, or anyone looking for fun ways to keep children reading and writing during the summer holidays, we've got hundreds of brilliant ideas to explore. Take a look for yourself at plazoom.com, where you can sign up to our newsletter and be the first to find out about our special offers and the new resources that are added to the site every single week. Every episode of Author in Your Classroom is packed with writing advice and inspiration from some of the world's best-loved children's writers. Plus, there are free activities and worksheets based on each author's work to spark children's imagination on plazoom.com. Just check the episode notes for links and more. You can subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts. We want to reach as many pupils in as many classrooms as possible, so please do give us a rating or a review, but above all, tell your colleagues about us and help spread the word. We know that a love of reading opens doors, not just to success at school and beyond, but to a lifetime of excitement, adventure and discovery. Let us help you make it happen with Author in Your Classroom and Plazoom.